can shortage is there again. And what was interesting about this is the sign this time was talking about for a prolonged period of time. Right in that second sentence there. These cans are going to be gone for a prolonged period of time. A few months ago when we saw the can shortages, it was just, we got can shortages, things will be back when they're back, cool, probably. We don't know how long, but sometime in the future. Never had I seen the word prolonged period of time until today. So obviously they're coming on in the bean section. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm with Danny King. You already know his channel, Deep South Homestead, but did you know he had a website too, deepsouthhomestead.com? You know the YouTube channel, but inside there's an enormous amount of resources to dig into with educational videos. There's also an enormous amount of images about the farm, what kind of produce, vegetables they're growing, the greenhouse off the back, which you can do also on your house. If you have some wood and some different, you could use regular plastics, laminated plastics, high-tech plastics, whatever it is, to create a greenhouse that's coming off your actual structure. It's a wealth of information. So, you know, Danny and I have been trying to contact for a while to get something together, and I am so happy that you're here today. And before our interview here, I was trying to explain that I want to get more information about the knowledge that he has, with extra couple decades on top of many of us out there watching, in terms of real hands on the ground, seeing these changes over an enormous amount of experience. You know, it's one thing to read about it in a book, you know, and have your guide and, you know, how to plant this or how to fix this, how to build this and do this in a book versus actually have done it already. And, you know, if you've done any gardening this year, you notice that the amount of difficulty that has been had trying to plant, replant, things are wet, things are dry, there's fungus, there's mold, there's weird insects, there's no insects. It's just been a real kind of hodgepodge mishmash around the US and Asia and parts of Europe for agriculture this year. So it's going to be more of an informative session, things that we might be able to explain the grand solar minimum better. Danny, you wanted to talk about that. So the floor is yours. And I wanted to just first start off by saying thanks for putting together the website. I've been watching a lot of these educational videos because myself, I'm always trying to learn. I only have my own knowledge, but there needs to be other knowledge shared through this time. And that's what it's going to be about, is communities of people sharing skill sets, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas that work or what don't work to save everybody else on that learning curve going up. Saving time, that's one thing we don't have. We don't have enough time, so we're going to have to leverage other people's knowledge to make that time occur faster, where you get to the outcome that you want. So educational videos, and I already had talking to somebody who's done it. Danny, thanks for joining, and the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, David. It's good to have actually connected with you. I watched most all of your videos. I want to tell you, I get excited when I get to watch one of them, because I'm always like, okay, what's he found out now? You know, what's going on now? And it really encourages me to see people like yourself indulging in this type of study, so that you can bring knowledge to even people like me, because I don't get to spend a lot of time on the internet anymore. Because, hey, let's just face it, if you're actually living this lifestyle, then there's not a lot of time in front of the internet. You know, like you said, my time is, I have feet on the ground, and I'm actually out doing it. Deep South Homestead is actually living what we put up. We're not, let me say this, YouTube people are known as quote unquote content creators, okay? We are not content creators. We are more of a reality show, if you want to say it, if you want to put it that way, because what you see on our YouTube channel is actually what's going on at the moment. People sometimes say, well, your camera's not in focus, or this is not that. Well, we are living it. We're not taking a lot of time to set up and do things like that. We're actually out figuring this thing out, because I've been keeping records of the weather probably for the last, I'm going to say the last 10 years. I have every day what the weather has done at my place. Here at Deep South Homestead, the weather is different than it is 10 miles up the road, say. And it's amazing the differences I'm finding out. I go back and I check my records from year to year to see, well, on this day, 2015, what was the temperature like then? What was the weather like then? What was I growing then? What was actually going on at that period? How was the crops doing? And things to this nature. And David, I've noticed things are beginning to decline rather rapidly. Things that we've been able to grow here at Deep South Homestead with no problems over the years, all of a sudden, I can't grow anymore. They're not working. I'm having to learn new ways of doing things. And it wasn't, I'm going to be honest, it wasn't until this past year, and I believe it may have even been through you, that I learned about the grand solar minimum. It's something that had just, I had seen glimpses of it, but I never really give it much thought. And I'm afraid, to be honest with you, I'm afraid that's what's happening to people today. They hear it, but yet they're not giving much thought to it, because they go, you know what, there's food in the grocery store. I can still go and do the weather. Yeah, I work inside an office all day. I live in a concrete jungle. I don't get to get outside very often, and the rain really doesn't mean anything to them. The dry weather really doesn't mean anything to them, because they still have access to a grocery store and they're still able to buy what they need. And I'm really being on my end of it, growing this food all the time, seeing the difficulty that it is trying to produce this food. We don't buy food from the grocery store. What we eat, we produce. If we don't produce, we don't eat. It's simply because of I don't trust the system anymore. I don't trust what's being put into the foods. I don't trust the fillers that's being put into the foods. I noticed one of your videos here a while back was dealing on cellulose and different things like that. And this is so true. I have some videos that I'm going to be putting up in the future about how well will you survive on the amount of carbs and proteins that you're taking in, because the bottom line is this, and we both know that there's a movement underway in this country and globally, let's just say globally, to take the nutrition out of food and to make it basically a product full of fillers. And here at Deep South Homestead, we try to raise everything we can so that we're eating real food that's not covered up in pesticides, and it's healthy. And I think that that's where most people are really missing the ball today, is they don't actually know what real food tastes like. They've eaten food from the grocery stores for so long that they have this misconception in their minds of what something is really supposed to taste like. And they don't realize that some foods that are grown in inappropriate ways. And because of it being grown that way, it doesn't have the minerals and it doesn't have the nutritional value that a food should have. That's one reason here at Deep South Homestead, we try to teach as much as we can about how to grow your food, how to preserve your food, and how to save seeds. Because let's just face it, there is a movement underway globally right now to bring down seed production so that people are not able to get seeds when they need them. And when they do get them, let's just say they're tampered with. Okay, let me use those words. They've been tampered with, and they're not going to be happy. I mean, people are buying these, and there's nothing wrong with this. They're buying these seeds, like 30-year seed supplies and stuff like that. And from experience here at Deep South Homestead, I'm learning that if you don't take a seed and put it in the ground and acclimate it to your climate, it's not going to produce to its capacity. Now, I've noticed this big time. We bought seeds just experimental from different seed companies, and we bring them in here and we actually plant them, and we plant them next to the ones that we've grown our whole life, and they're both the same varieties. The ones that we brought in does not perform hardly at all compared to the ones that we've been growing here for quite some time. They're not acclimated to our environment. And with the grand solar minimum, I'm really believing that that's going to play a huge part in our survival as an individual is whether or not we've prepared our soil, we have our seed acclimated for our soil, and whether or not we're going to be able to actually survive based on those principles.
Yeah, the seeds too. You know, if you can find a more local vendor for your seeds. So you're down in Mississippi, I'm up in Tennessee. You know, some people are up in New York. I mean, do they have a local seed supplier for that Southeast region, specifically your state? You know, if you're up in New York, you're stoked because there's a couple seed companies located up there. So those seeds are probably going to be a little more conducive being grown up there than they would further south where it gets excruciatingly hot and humid in the summer, and not so much up in New York. I mean, there's a huge difference in the heat in the south during the summer. And this thing with cellulose too, it's a scary little animal out there because the more research you're doing on the lobbyists at the moment out there pushing USDA regulation, FDA regulation to try to increase the amount of cellulose in the food. Now currently, just because I'll wrap up, 3.5% of filler is in meats now. And I was shocked. How would they be able to fill meat with 3.5% cellulose? But they do around the edges and in the fat to try to make it look whiter on the fat and try to bulk it out a little bit. But when you go in and you get these crackers and anything low fat, they're putting anywhere between 18 and 30% filler in there. So if you get a cookie, literally 18% of that is sugarcane fiber ground up that's made, it's tasteless, has the same texture as the cookie. But the scary thing is the lobbyists are in there in Washington now trying to increase the amount of allowable cellulose. Now, currently at the highest available level or the highest allowable limits, 30% is where you can go. And then they have to get an exemption because that's an extreme case. So most companies keep it below 20% now. At 18 is the average across the industry. But they're in there right now pushing for new laws that will allow them to bring it up to 35 to 37% cellulose. So it's already following on the key element after I did more research of, hey, you need to look for lobbyists. If we're going to go into more tumultuous food growing time, they're going to try to supplement more filler to make it look as if there's enough food or same amount of food. But they're going to have to lobby to get that up. And that's exactly what they're doing. And you look, I just today I did a video, somebody from Houston, Texas. Can shortages there again. And what was interesting about this is the sign this time was talking about for a prolonged period of time. Right in that second sentence there. These cans are going to be gone for a prolonged period of time. A few months ago when we saw the can shortages, it was just, we got can shortages, things will be back when they're back, cool, probably. We don't know how long, but sometime in the future. Never had I seen the word prolonged period of time until today. So obviously they're coming on in the bean section in Houston, and I don't know which supermarket it was. They were just, images were sent to me. Yeah, it's actually coming out now into the forefront that things are going to be, well, not as available as they used to be. So what are some of the things you can do to can for yourself? I mean, if I'm going to start canning today, I don't know anything about canning. I know there's like a glass jar and this thing that goes on top, and that's all I know. What's the easiest thing to can? Like if you're going to be a beginner canner, and what grows well where you're at, and what's the easiest thing to can? Because, you know, if you say a melon or a carrot or something under the ground, anything that it can be replicated. It could be sugar beets, which have been wiped out. I was reading some reports on sugar beets today. North Dakota, they lost something like 55% of their crop of sugar beets, and then all the seed potatoes as well is something above 70%. So, I mean, sheesh. I hope something's easy to can, and I hope something grows underground, because right now I'm happy my sweet potatoes are growing.
Well, let's, with all the geoengineering going on, we'll use those words, with all the geoengineering going on out there, the spraying and different things like that, doesn't matter which plant you plant, it requires a certain amount of UV rays in order for the cell structure of that plant to be able to produce like it should. And with a lot of the spraying going on, the aluminum that's ending up in our soil is binding up the phosphorus in the soil, and our plants are not being able to take up the phosphorus that they need because it's being bound up into the soil. So thus, a lot of our plants are not producing, whether they be above ground, below ground, or whatever. My opinion is in the future, if you're going to be able to survive, and we're experimenting with this right now at Deep South Homestead, is greenhouse growing. because I believe that you're going to have plants in the future if you're going to raise anything that has any nutritional value or anything that produces what it should produce right off the bat. It's going to have to be in a climate controlled environment. And that is where you're going to have a greenhouse at. We're noticing in our greenhouse right now, we're growing tomatoes, not on a large scale, but as an experimental thing, and a particular variety, and they are blemish free. We have absolutely no problem with these tomatoes so far. And the sad part about it is they're a hybrid. And a lot of people are saying, well, you're going to have heirloom. You got to have heirloom. And I agree with that 100%. We have literally tons of heirloom seeds here at Deep South Homestead. I have saved my seeds for up to 20-something years, a lot of them. And they're producing like they should produce. But what I'm noticing is if I put my heirloom, let's say heirloom tomato seeds, if I put my heirloom tomato seeds out in my garden, they've always produced abundantly. Now I'm having problems with them producing, and I'm doing the same thing I've always done. My soil analysis I've had it tested. My soil is exactly what it's always been. It's just that the intensity of the sun, the amount of humidity that's in the air, the amount of rain that we're getting, the amount of rain that we're not getting, whichever way you want to go with it, is affecting those plants to the point to where my heirlooms are not producing. I'm having to go to some hybrids that are VFN, VFNT, MV, all these different disease-resistant parts to the plant in order to get a tomato now that will actually grow and produce a tomato in the climate outside because of what's going on. Now you're asking what is one of the easier things to can. You're gonna probably have to stay with your acid foods. They're mostly water bath. They're safer. They will be your things like tomatoes, peaches, pears, apples, any of your acid fruits like that can be water bathed with virtually, really, really low percentage of having to worry about anything going wrong with them. Where you start running into problems is when you start getting into your pressure canning stuff. Lots of things like, say, corn, for instance. Corn takes an hour and a half. Most of your meats take an hour and a half to an hour, and almost all of them are an hour and a half. And things like green beans are relatively easy to can. They're pressure canned, but they're relatively easy. I would say a beginner gardener who is wanting to start out, someone who's wanting to learn how to save some of their own food and to can some of their own food would be things like tomatoes. Find a variety, talk to someone in your area that has found a variety that's working. Green beans, find a variety of green beans, whether they be bush or whether they be pole, either one in your area. Those are the two easiest that we found that produce and that you can with them, relatively easy. Now we grow a lot of potatoes here. I have a video coming out about the ground solar minimum and some of the easiest crops to grow during the ground solar minimum as far as maintenance is concerned. One of them is potatoes. If you live in an environment that doesn't freeze bad all the time, potatoes is. I'm not talking about sweet potatoes. I'm talking about, we call them Irish potatoes here. They're your most maintenance-free crop that will produce with a minimal amount of fertilizer being done to them and a minimal amount of work being done to the ground. You basically can go out and plow up a grassy area and just put some potatoes in the ground, and you don't even have to touch them, and they'll produce potatoes. That's the beauty behind them.
Yeah, you were talking about needing more potassium uptake. I've been also talking with a couple of people who are saying that industrial size farms now are experiencing the same thing. So what they're going in there is with an enormous amount of extra potash and basically adrenalizing the plants with additions of massive amounts of potash to overcome what you're talking about. But most of us, where do you go find a ton of potash to put out on your fields? Most people have no idea where to start with that. So in the future, they're also looking at potash companies running in price, but then the available supply of potash at the moment, if industrial growers are all switching to this, and they understood after this year it worked. This is year number one. It worked this year to adrenalize the plants with an enormous potash ad. So everybody's going to do it next year. So what was a minimal run or a minimal amount of required potash for this year for those experimenting with it on the industrial scale, and when I say industrial scale, I'm talking like 5,000, 10,000 acre farms, something, you know, mid-range like this, nothing like a 1,000,000 acre farm yet. But imagine when these 1,000,000 acre conglomerates come in and start using potash to adrenalize the plants to get them to grow, then where's the whole potash market globally going to go? And this is something that we're all going to need too as individuals. So now it's like company and individual coming for the same exact product, which I envisioned would start to happen in 2021 as more people become aware of this grand solar minimum and what it is. Like Danny, you said it, most people don't care. It's too like lexicon dense. There's too many like big words and scientific stuff inside there. And they're like, oh, I'm already lost. You're talking solar field. What is this thing? So right. Maybe 2021, when the realization comes out that, there's something wrong and the sun is like not going to be as active as it was. Maybe that's a simpler way to say, and it'll affect the cloud cells and the jet streams on Earth because the lower the activity in the sun means the crazier the cloud cells and the jet streams will get on Earth, like a super equal, it's an easy maybe equation to talk about. But when the masses of the world wake up, we're going to come into this same exact thing. You need potash, I need potash, all the companies and governments need potash. And looking at the global supply right now, definitely not enough, anywhere close to being enough if everybody starts using it to overcome what nature's throwing at us. Okay, that's one example of like thousands in the future. Seeds is going to be another one. You know, seeds, whether you buy them, whether you store them, whatever, they're going to be more difficult to get. Imagine if just half the world wakes up and understands they have to grow their own food. Like what kind of drawdown would that be? Right now, it's a click of a mouse and you can get seeds sent to your house. How many people are going to start clicking? Like, oh, I heard I need seeds. Click, 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 click. It's going to overwhelm the supply chain coming up here. And look for potash to be the first canary in the coal mine of how quickly a supply chain can be overrun when individuals, institutions, and government all are going for the same exact product. So any thoughts on the potash? Because I've talked to a couple of people about it, and I've really been looking into it about, you know, do you really have to like adrenalize these plants to get them to grow? Because if it is like that already, I mean, what if you don't have the access to the potash? What kind of yield declines are you looking at next year? Because by all accounts and, you know, forecasts out, it looks like it's going to be a little bit worse for growing next year than this year. So each successive year might be a step down in productivity, but will be just a regular linear decline, or will it be massive drop off, steady for 2 years, massive drop off, steady for a year? Hard to tell right now. It's the first grand solar minimum we've gone through. Us, even in how many generations would it be to go back to the 1640s? How many generations is that? Back to 1640, how much? So you're thinking of what, about 30 years per generation? What, 12, 14 generations back? We haven't experienced anything like this.
Right. Our experience here is we've had as much as a 50% decline this year alone, just based on not the availability of stuff in the soil. That's the reason this year I ran immediately when I began to realize I had problems. We talked about this earlier. It's sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes is something here that I have never had a problem with. I mean, I put potatoes draws in the ground, and I mean, I grow lots of sweet potatoes for an individual like us. I mean, we're talking about 600 to 800 pounds of sweet potatoes a year just for us. That's what it takes for us to make it for a year and have a few left over for the next year. This year, I planted 700 draws, which is my normal planting. Out of the 700 that I planted, now these are draws I purchased because I had trouble getting my draws to actually come up this year because the ground would never warm up enough for the sweet potato to actually make the draws because of the solar minimum. There again, the ground would not warm up. So I purchased them. Out of 700 draws, we lost almost all of them. The only sweet potatoes we grew this year were from draws that we finally got a place warm enough on our property to get some draws up, and they were planted late. We got about 200 up, and they were all ours. The ones we purchased did not produce at all. Now this year, we're taking a little bit different route. As a matter of fact, as I'm sitting here in my studio room right now looking out across my property, I'm actually looking at people up north call it a cold frame. Down south we call it a hot frame. We're going to be putting sweet potatoes in them in probably the next 2 to 3 weeks to begin to get our draws up. So we're trying to beat everything this year. We're trying to get a jump on it. And David, what we're experiencing is, let me put it this way, what we're finding out is that some states are already beginning to make it illegal to purchase this product. We're noticing in, I believe it was, I want to say it was the panhandle of, the panhandle of Florida. Some people of ours that are subscribers there have told us that they cannot purchase it there because it's not permitted. And then for what reason, I haven't gone into looking into if there's any reasoning behind this. But if that's the case, then people like us, we create our own soil. Now, I don't go to the store and buy composted soil. I don't go buy dirt, I guess would be the easiest way to put it. Because, and I get in a lot of trouble for this, David. I'm going to say this, and I might as well go ahead and get it off my chest. I get in a lot of trouble for this. Plants that are grown, I'm choosing my words carefully here. Plants that are grown in cups and and I don't want to mention any company names, but plants that come in little peated pots and stuff like this. I am learning in the deep south here where I live at that if I buy these plants and I put them in the ground with that dirt out of that pot around that plant, that the type of composted dirt that's in that little cup, peated cup, whatever you want to call it, actually wicks the water away from the ground, and it wicks it to that one particular spot right there, leaving the ground around the plant dry, and the plant actually never spreads any roots very far beyond that little peat cup, and the plant actually spends a lot of time in the stress mode rather than in the producing mode. So we've learned if you're going to buy a plant in town, first of all plants bought have a growth inhibitor put on them to keep them from growing while they're in transit, and while they're waiting for you to buy them, they have a growth inhibitor put on them. I take mine, and a lot of people don't like this, but I'll take Miracle Grow and mix it up, and I actually submerge that whole plant in Miracle Grow and slosh it around as much as I can, and I actually wash some of the dirt off the roots and put that thing in the pure dirt here at Deep South Homestead, and I get a better result that way than I do if I actually just put the plant straight off the shelf in the store into the ground in the peat cup and expect it to do what it needs to do. Now, talking about the phosphorus thing, here on our place, we're learning. I have no scientific evidence to back this up, but we're learning that if we let wood in trash piles rot down and create its own dirt, and we use that dirt, our phosphorus content is a lot higher in that dirt than the dirt that's in our fields that we use on normal basis. And that's where we're getting a lot of our phosphorus. When I did my soil analysis this year, some of my fields were screaming high in phosphorus, and I had not added any phosphorus to it. And we're attributing it to the fact that we're letting the wood rot, and the phosphorus is coming out of the wood. We're finding that out here.
Yeah, how much wood are you talking about? How many logs or how many cords would you be? I mean, it's not actually cord because that's good burnable wood, but if you got some scrap wood that you're letting burn down in a pile, are you mixing it in with other things inside the compost? Is it pure wood, or how are you trying to bring it in for somebody out there that's interested in making a compost like this?
What we're doing is actually, as I clear land, I'm actually pushing my land with my tractor, and I'm trying to get very little of the topsoil off. I'll just knock the trees over, and when I say trees, I'm talking about anything 2 inches and less in diameter over, and I'll knock them around and get most of the dirt off the roots, and I just kind of push them up into a pile and crush them down with the bucket on the tractor and just leave them. We're with things like small oaks, small yopons, just different types of vines and stuff like this. We're just matting it all together, crushing it down, letting it lay for about 6 months, come back in. But by then it's in our kind of humidity and our kind of heat, you crush it the second time, it just really crumbles down to small pieces of wood. And then we'll put a little bit of our normal dirt on top of it. We'll just sprinkle some dirt in on it. And within a year to year and a half, we actually have dirt that we can use.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the things because as a supply chain, because you have to add the economy into this whole equation here. Everything's revolving on credit.
Yes.
And, you're talking about going to a store to buy something. Well, that's going to be one of the Achilles heels in this whole mechanism moving forward.